Hey, fellow G and Tears, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. So we've been doing a very kind of Jin and Tantra bit of like mixology. We've been seeing what happens when you take the eccentric genius type psychologist Wilhelm Reich's ideas, especially his idea of the emotional plague, and we've been combining that with things from Taoism and Chinese medicine to see what happens when we give a little shaking, a little mix up to these two sets of ideas, and we kind of give them a little blending. And today we've gotten to the point where we're going to be talking about the heart and the emotions of the heart, things like joy and bliss versus feelings like maybe depression or mania. So those kinds of things. And that'll be the next piece of what we're doing as we kind of explore all these different ideas. But before we get into it, if you could do all the things that people ask you, like every single time you click on a video or whatever like
Do
this,
it. Just do it.
which is like, subscribe, share a video if you're into it, right? And that will bring a little bit more joy to all our lives. We all need a little bit more joy, and it will help us have the joy of escaping from under the clutches and the oppressive powers of the dreaded algorithm and our tech overlords.
And
Okay,
let's keep it real. I mean, the content that we are making is not standard. This is not the normal thing, right?
for better or worse, that's true.
For better or worse, that's true. So if you're listening to us, thank you for listening and understand that my guess is you are kin to us, right? You are
Mhm.
you are in a similar mind state of Eric and I and what we find interesting and what we are passionate about. So I'm sort of breaking the fourth wall, if you will, at this moment. So hi, hello,
Yeah,
bing, bing, bing. Hey, you. That's right.
yeah.
But that puts you probably in a very small percentage of the population. And what I mean by that is that I think most people generally like for things to be very clear, very concise, with nice tight boundaries. Therefore, it's very easy to delineate what is or is not, good for me. What is or is not on my path, whatever that path might be. The much more interesting and far more difficult path, in my opinion, is one where these boundaries are way more blurry and that line of like what is good and not good. Yes, of course, there still is lines of good and not good in terms of making other people suffer, whatever, doing, evil things, right? Harming others, harming yourself. I'm not talking about this, right? But it's this like ethically dubious stance that stands outside of the culture's need for control that often is passed on to us, from our families and everything else, that people try and intentionally break these habits, break these chains, break this cycle, and try and think for themselves. And not just think for themselves in terms of what is good or not good, but what is actually going to be beneficial for your life. And not just for your work life, but for your personal life, for your energetic life, and if we can even dare say, your spiritual life. And so this is what interests us, and this is what, turns us on, if you will. And this is what we're sharing. So if you're here with us, we always say it, but thank you for listening. And we want to challenge things that you think because we are always being challenged for things how we think, and we share what we find interesting.
Yeah, I think all this stuff is just adds more fuel to the old spiritual fire, right?
Yeah.
The inner heat, as the tantrics might say, or the
Yeah.
Taoists might say, right?
Yeah.
Build up a little more inner heat and see what gets burnt away. Yeah. All right, well said. Um, Brief preliminaries. If you haven't heard the previous episodes, I'll do this in the briefest way possible. The emotional plague idea from Reich is this really fascinating concept. On the one hand, it addresses like what happens when a culture goes completely off the rails. These ideas get toxic like a plague and spread through a culture. So for us, this has been part of our 2025 America What the Hell series. We've been trying to figure this out, right? Sharing ideas to help each other figure it out. And William Reich talks about this in a little book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. But there's like what you were talking about, Daniel, on a more personal level. This is always also really valuable things to consider the emotional plague and related ideas because they're relevant for people who are looking for things like freedom or authenticity, or dare we even say enlightenment, right? Real psychospiritual growth on a personal level because overcoming these things, the emotional plague, or you could say conventional truths or mundane conceptions and appearances, if you want to be a tantrika or a Taoist or a Zen person, or maybe like a little Sufism in your life. this is what you need, right? This is what everybody's going to need in order to like be able to grow and develop oneself. So probably I would argue whatever true and genuine kind of path of self-discovery you want to be on, some way or another, this question is going to come up, right? Emotional plague and how do you transcend it? All right. So, well, you said like part of what you wanted to say with this already. So we're onto the fire face, unless you have more you want to add to this,
No, I
Danny.
think the last thing, I used to not believe this, but I actually believe it more now than I think I ever have. And that there are far more people who are seeking now than ever before. And I don't mean that by sheer volume for our rational thinkers, which is me. I'm speaking to the rational part of my brain that needs to hear it. Yes, there's more people now than there ever have been before. So there will be more of everything now than there ever have been before. Yes. Captain Obvious, let me get my cape out. But I mean, percentage wise, I believe genuinely that there are more seekers now, percentage wise, than there ever have been previously. And I say that not because I have any, as they say, evidence to back this up, because I don't know how you'd even qualify one who is seeking versus one who isn't, because I think everybody's seeking something, but I think you understand what I mean by people who are, seeking. I say that because the amount of control, because guests we used to have on the show, Mary Kay Ryan, used to always say everything has a light and a dark side to it. In reality, everything has a light and a dark side. And so, as more people are seeking the light, if you will, there is going to be an equal and opposite reaction towards that motion. And the amount of opposite reaction to that now on a mass scale is very high. The measures of control and surveillance and influence, i.e., propaganda, is higher than it has ever been. And it is across all sort of platforms. It is amongst people. It is, whatever. That means to me they're pushing against something. And, regardless of where people fall on the political spectrum, they could still be seeking. It's a possibility. Um, it would stand to reason in my mind that the press back against these people seeking outside of society is growing so much so that the mechanisms of control have to become even stronger. And so that's how I come to that conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder what I think about that. I don't know, but in any case, what I do think is that like, the opposite of like kind of a spiritual freedom is like authoritarian practices, right?
Yes, yes.
So, and the authoritarian practices are in a struggle. It's, they're not obviously like, going to like totally seize the day. So it means there are people who are resisting. And I think if you're doing that, you're doing it from a spirit of like, I want individual freedom and I want individual
Mm-hmm.
expression and I want
Mm-hmm.
individual creativity,
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, from that point of view, there's a real struggle, right? And if it was
Mm-hmm.
all like all the momentum was just on one side, then the struggle would already be over. But it's not. It's
Mm-hmm.
happening because there's enough people going, wait a minute. No, I don't want, I want space and freedom and again, individual development, cultivation, and so on. There's enough
Mm-hmm.
people saying that. Yeah. So yeah, that's a this is a very optimistic episode for the fire face for us and the heart. Because in Chinese medicine, the heart and Taoism, the heart is associated with the fire of life, right? The passion and the energy and the creativity. All right. Well, okay, good. Seems good. We're all set up to go into it. You and I are feeling probably a little fiery. We were both on retreat over the weekend and we had a good time. So our joy and fire is doing pretty good today.
Yeah,
Good timing on this particular thing.
yeah.
Auspicious timing, as the Tibetans would say. Very auspicious. And actually, you know what? Blitz Day was just on Sunday, and I don't think we talked about that,
We
but
did
we had a
not.
massive Sunday
We had a
for our
massive Sunday.
retreats. Shit, it didn't occur to
Yes.
me. That was Wheel of
That
Bliss Day.
there we go. Okay.
And that was true.
That was true. I told you there was a
Yeah.
portal open.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that. It was
Yeah.
a very we were just off mic. We were talking to before we started recording about just what a powerful day that was for both of us. We both got
Yeah.
our associate hats on straight and really kind of like got in the spiritual mojo really good. So, all right. Yeah, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Hmm. Brilliant.
Brent.
Oh, there's truth in these things.
You're damn right.
Start taking a ride and you'll be surprised where it'll take you, right?
Yeah.
Find there's all kinds of like weird pathways that you didn't know were even there.
Hmm.
Grooves in the universe. Okay. All right. So the heart, Taoist thought, fire energies or fire phase energies, however you want to call that, from the positive side of this. And it's really like the dominant emotion. So it's very interesting. We've gone through these different organs and their different energies and emotions. And this is the one where there's the most interesting thing because they really talk about joy, or if you want to get to the like even higher frequency joys, right? You can call that even bliss, right? So these are the positives of these things. So I suppose part of the question for me when I was thinking about this was, what's the status of this within the culture, right? Do we have a problem around these emotions? And for me, what always comes up with this is I studied when I was back in grad school. I was doing my TCM education, and I was studying with a Chinese medical doctor and Taoist. I'm very grateful to for him spending time trying to help me and a couple of other students back in the day, which was Master Shengli Wang, Dr. Wang. And his observation was there's kind of a problem of joy in the culture. And he was surprised, and this maybe has come up in the episodes before, I don't remember, but he had come from China in the 1950s, older guy, already established person by the time I met him with his practice around Chicago, but trained in China, relocated here. And growing up in those times in China, it was like incredibly chaotic. And I think even within his own circle of people, there were betrayals and, all kinds of toxic stuff that happens when you have a system collapsing, right? And so much chaos, right? So he lived through that. And I think when he was coming here, he thought, well, all the people here should be pretty cheery and, should feel good. And he was like painfully shocked. And it's a weird question as to why, but he definitely like thought, okay, this is a real problem. There's a kind of like an epidemic of a certain kind of joylessness. And, maybe it's the first place to start exploring why we think that might be. We might have different reasons around this. That's the purpose of this episode to talk about this. And then how do you recapture the joy once you sort of start diagnosing the problem?
Yeah.
And I kept thinking like, well, there's a lot of like burden that people feel. They feel financially burdened. They feel professionally burdened. A lot of times they feel like burdened kind of like on a day-to-day basis, and that those burdens are kind of like a killer of joy. They do lead to some of the other emotions we've been talking about, feelings of, anger and frustration that we talked about in previous episodes, or feelings of despondency and sadness and grief, like we talked about the episode we recorded before this one. But that was sort of what resonated with me at the time. Of course, we can explore other things too, but I'll throw it back to you, Daniel. What do you think about Dr. Wong, his observations and
You
all that?
know, I don't do it too often, but I have to give a shout out to my former partner. So hopefully she's listening, but I doubt it. But if you are, hey, how's it going? And she was asked something, a question a while back. They said, "What would you do if you could live forever?" And she said, "I don't want to live forever." And they said, "Well, why not?" She goes, "Because I'm going to have to continue to work and continue to produce. And I don't want that kind of responsibility forever."
Yeah, yeah.
And I just thought, I thought that was a really profound observation. And I think that is in the heart of what you are saying, is that in particular in this culture, and this has been mimicked or mirrored or repeated by my teacher Andre, who said it's very difficult to be here because you have to constantly make money. You have to pay this. There's so many things that you need to pay for that you're essentially more of a battery than you are of a person. So like, hearkening to the Matrix or something like this. And
Hmm.
that kind of drive to produce, it puts a lot of pressure, lots of pressure. And then, we're fighting inflation and rising costs and, societal, upheaval and things like this. It just sucks the fucking joy out of the damn thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's like this fear component too, and you can kind of like scratch the surface with people. And I feel a lot of times it's like hidden underneath like the decisions that people make, and we can explore it a little bit more as we go. But
mhm.
you feel like there's not a lot of like support to the floor, right? If that floor gives through, you feel like, man, where's the bottom if I start falling,
Yeah.
right? So you can get yourself to some position where, okay, I feel stable, I feel a little stable, but you sort of know like, ooh, it's not that solid. like the struts and the supports aren't necessarily holding this up that great. And if one of those, then the whole thing might go bang and like
Yeah.
fall down and people feel it,
Yeah.
right? Even when you're in that position of stability, you know?
I saw a chart, I forgot where I saw it, but it had a list of all these countries and the amount of annual bankruptcies from medical reasons. Like Great Britain, Spain, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Italy, Germany, donuts all the way down. United States, 50,000.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So
like, yeah,
the bottom that you're talking
yeah.
about, yeah, I mean, there it is. It's right there. I mean, and that could happen to any, it's a car accident, which is not even, something you can control. It has nothing to do with if you went to McDonald's yesterday or not. That's just,
Mhm.
did some idiot run a red light?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And maybe they hit and run you and maybe they're gone. And now what's going to happen with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that feeling, sometimes, when I stage these things in my mind, I sort of talk about like different places where people at, and some people are struggling to pull themselves up to that point of stability, and that's a certain problem to have in life, right? But then even if you get to that place of stability, man, you just don't feel like this floor is that solid, like we've been
Yeah.
talking about. And
Yeah.
then, you feel that threat. And I don't know if like for someone coming like, again, my teacher, Master Wong, Dr. Wong coming that, you don't know that till you're here, right? You don't feel that kind of insecurity. It's a very particular thing to feel.
Mm,
And I don't know if people from the outside can really look at that. So I thought about that a lot, like over the years. And I've known people who come from other countries. And initially they're like, ooh, they feel good about it. And they realize, oh my God, this is really fragile.
mm,
My life is like surprisingly fragile. So I saw that too. It's interesting because maybe it's like you and your Daniel Capricorn energy we sometimes talk about because but
mm,
like I think if I go back to the very first episodes, we were recording during the pandemic and it was always this thing about like the work problem too that's been a
mm-hmm,
repeating thing. How
mm-hmm.
do you get yourself into some position? And I mean that's what your former partner said so eloquently, right? This problem. So yeah, then different levels of this. Some parts of this, to my mind, can and I think we would agree with this clinically, can be really deep depressions, right? And those have a very unique quality. And obviously, we have a depression problem like in the country, right? That is epidemic on some level. And those can be really deep. But I think the other more subtle point would be like what's sometimes called like the apathetic depressions
Mm,
where people feel kind of like, okay, I'm going through the motions, I'm going through the motions, and yet, you don't have that spirit of like joy there. I'm able to
yeah.
get through it on a daily basis, but you just don't feel that joie de vivre, if you want to be French or something. You don't
Mm,
feel that fire, right? Um, and one of the people that was a big influence for me in like the Chinese medical world, Dr. Leon Hammer, would use like the line from like Henry David Thoreau, this feeling of like lives of quiet desperation,
mm-hmm.
So, you're not, if you're depressed, that's a certain kind of problem, but also there's this kind of flatness problem too. Okay, I'm going through the motions, I'm going through the motions, but I don't feel that fire energy kind of joy and happiness. I know what do you
There,
think about that? Yeah.
what's the name of that guy? Flat Steve or Flat Phil or
Flat Stanley,
yeah, there you go, Flat
the kid thing
Stanley.
where he mails himself and I do know that, but I didn't tangented. Yeah, Flat Stanley.
Right. So there you go.
He's like an old kid's book where like he mails himself through the mail to
Yeah.
people like whatever he does. Yeah, flat Stanley. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I suppose on the other side of this can be the feeling of unhealthy aspects of this. So that could be feelings of like manicness or hyperactivity, kind of things that people can feel when you get sort of this opposite polarity. You don't feel it's not so much like even that you're lacking joy, but you feel kind of frenzied or kind of manic. Now, if you have real diagnosable mania, that's one thing, obviously. But this idea of being in kind of these hypermanic states, where you feel like you're always in this kind of overly young, revved up kind of stuff, but that's not entirely enjoyable either,
Right.
right? You rev up those energies and, If you get to the physical part, your heart might be racing around and you feel like you can't sleep and you're restless and agitated and these kinds of things from the opposite point of view.
Hmm.
So, I mean, these are kind of like polarities that will kind of pull you away from the joy thing in like different directions. You get more clinical thoughts on that
You
or?
know, that is just reminding me of like a serotonin hit, right?
Mm,
That maybe people don't experience that kind of mania in their life, right? But if we look at like what are the nitrous boosts of our day? Caffeine for sure, one of them.
revs
Um,
up the heart, right?
exactly, right?
Yeah.
You can look at Ritalin. You could look at what's the other one that people like to use to study with for focus? I forget what that one's called.
Oh, for some reason it's like it's not hitting me, but yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right. Vyvanse,
Yeah.
yeah, no, whatever. Yeah, but stuff for like ADHD kind of medications that are just basically like high
Speed.
dose. Yeah, speed essentially, right? And
Yeah.
then dopamine.
Yeah.
So, what you'll get from scrolling on the phone, social media interactions, and things like this, short-term bursts are little addictions, you know? This to me is like a very practical microcosm of this kind of mania, if you will, that definitely affects the heart.
Yeah, I feel like I'm less maybe dopamine negative than sometimes the way it's presented in the culture, but it has to be directed towards true, exciting, interesting experience, not just like funneled off, not to have that yang energy funneled off into like rando, anxiety driven kind of behaviors or something like that, right? So
Adderall.
that's what it was. Two medical folks who couldn't come up with that shit.
Come on.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry,
Wah,
guys.
wah. It
Dr.
was on the
Daniel,
tip of
my
my
ass.
tongue, but I was like, bleh.
Yeah, yeah.
Adderall, duh. Yeah. Which like does act like it just jacks the heart rate up and
Yeah.
kind of discombobulates things internally, right?
But these are methods for dealing with flat Stanley, you know? These are methods for dealing with flat affect. These are ways in which that you could introduce elements of boosting the heart, literally, sometimes in the case of caffeine, but these other ones as well, right?
Yeah.
So there's an acknowledgement of a underlying sadness, of a lack of heart fire on one hand, and therefore there's all these antidotes on the other hand that people don't even probably realize that's what they're using it for. They're using it to like stimulate excitedness in order to try and stoke joy. But really you're putting a high-powered fan on a very dimly lit flame.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, you're giving like a whoosh to something that really the more logical thing would be like, let me turn up the lighter.
Right, yeah. So it's a can of
Yeah.
hairspray on a lighter. You'll get a quick pop,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's gonna be the can of hairspray is gonna be burned out.
Yeah, and eventually like the lighter like, is gonna you have to turn up the lighter at some point or another or put more juice into the lighter, right? That's the way
Yeah.
it's gonna have to play itself
I
out.
wish I could I wish I could ask the audience. I hope they understand the analogy that we're making currently. But and if we're not, I'm going to make it just a little bit more clear. What I'm saying specifically is that people's heart fire is generally low in life because of the reasons that we've been talking about, Rob. Joylessness, infinite kind of work, more flatter kind of an affect. And the opposite side of that is a very quick kind of nitrous boost to your flame, as if we were to take hairspray to a lighter. It's bright, it's quick, like coffee, like Adderall, like Ritalin or whatever, some kind of upper, some dopamine, social media, phone interaction, something like this are general addictions, the gambling, especially for young men now. These kinds of things are a quick burst, but they are not sustainable, at least not in the way that you would think they are for your own sense of edification, for your own sense of joy, right? And they're not sustainable in terms of their willingness to burn out your wallet in the process. Like you cannot purchase joy. And I can hear the audience being like, "Well, what about, Yes, I mean, do things make you joyful? Of course. Who doesn't love to get a new blank? But that the response that you get from that new blank is not going to be the same response that if you get a new blank tomorrow. And it'll be even less the day after that and the day after that till eventually the new things ain't going to do it for you. And you need more and more and more kind of stimulus in order to wake up that heart fire. But it's not going to be woken up through external mediation. It never will. Not for any length of time, anyways.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So the next thing I put on, well said. Yep,
Yep.
I get it. Right. I suppose like the next thing I put on the docket, because I was thinking a lot about with my retreat over the weekend, I was thinking a little bit about Rumi, one of our favorite folks for this little podcast, certainly like a spiritual important figure for me. And I was also thinking about our last episode and the whole impact of like interpersonal conflict and relational conflict on the heart too, I think deserved a comment and a mention. So I just put it in my jottings down for what to talk about here. And this is like a deep subject matter. It's probably one of my pet subject matters that I think about a lot, which is like how do you make healthy relationships with people and save the heart, sort of the pains of like heartbreak and separation and all these things. The basic principle in like sort of the Taoist Chinese medical world will go, you open up your heart, you make a connection with like they'll say even like your spirit translates through your heart, right? You open up the heart, you make a connection with the heart spirit of another person. You have that kind of bond and entwinement. And then if those relations, go awry and people get heartbroken, there's a collapse of the heart more inward on itself in kind of a self-protective way, right?
Mm. Hmm.
Sometimes in the Chinese medical and Taoist world, this will be like the pericardium kind of rushes around, the wrapper physically around the heart, protecting the heart physically, but also the thing that tries to protect the heart psychologically, right? And so, to like sort of try to like shield and kind of cope with some of those more difficult emotions, the pericardium goes into hypervigilance, right? Sometimes in the Taoist or Chinese medical metaphor, this is like the ministers rushing in to try to like help the empress. We all rush into the center and things collapse into the center, as opposed to going outwards in this yang expressive way, it turns inwards, right? And the pericardium and the heart collapse into themselves and things get very tight, right? And I was thinking about this because we had episodes we did on sadness and grief, and this subject matter came up, and I was like, it's really a similar set of questions when you start thinking about the heart, right? Like heartbreak and how that affects people. And like to my mind, I think this is just a very powerful question that I think you have to ask yourself in terms of your life, and then how these questions are handled like within the culture itself. But let me throw it back to you, Daniel, first before I go along. You got stuff to think about with that?
Well, I don't remember if I'm making the story up or not. So, but I could share it anyways. I think there was a friend of mine who actually got pericarditis, which is the inflammation of the pericardium, after he found out some information about a girl he was dating that happened to her or that she did when she was in high school. That would be very I don't want to give the details away, but let's just say she probably was a bit more promiscuous in high school than some would like. And they were dating in their early 20s, and he found out about what happened. And I think it involved some of his friends. This is before they started dating. And then he found out about it. And then probably within the next month or so, ended up getting pericarditis,
Oh,
which is
okay,
kind of
that's a
like
little
a
clinical. Yeah.
yeah, which and is an inflammation or can be infection sort of, if you will, of the pericardium, which Eric just said sort of wraps around the heart. So sometimes you can get very somatic responses to even heartbreaks that you wouldn't imagine are like they didn't break up then, but it elicited a physiological response.
Yeah, and there is that idea, and I forget the Japanese word for it. I always do. Like it's TSUBKO or some other combination of things, but it's like broken heart syndrome, where like actually the physical change of the heart is like observable, right? If you do like an MRI or something like that, you can see that the shape of the heart is distorted or something because of this pressure, right? And I think clinically you see patients like this. I remember again, similar to what you're talking about with your friend, there was a patient, he always comes to mind with this, but he had gone into like even the emergency room because he was worried. He thought, am I having like heart pains like in a way that's I should have concern about my cardiovascular health? And what you might call like a sternal pain syndrome was diagnosed, like the big bone in the center of the chest. And when you really like took it apart, what really had happened was he had gone through this divorce and it had been
Mm,
very painful for him. And it was like 2 years past, but he obviously wasn't over it. He was still, as you would say, somaticizing, like feeling that pain of those events. It was still there for him. And it was like, okay, so this is our Chinese medical diagnosis, right? Somehow you have all this tension locked up in this, very, deep kind of part of yourself, like in the heart itself. And in Taoist Chinese medical thought, so connected to the mind and the emotions, right?
mm-hmm,
Especially those of love and connection.
mm-hmm,
So, anyways, like, that's a kind of a not unusual thing to clinically see, right?
mm,
Or like any of us in our lives probably to experience too, right? I usually like kind of share this with students, and I can't remember if it's come up in our episodes or not, but I had sort of the first love of my life, Susan. And we were together from our teens into our like kind of mid 20s. And I can
mm,
remember at the time when we were separating, I didn't know anything about Chinese medicine. It never occurred to me in ever that I cared about Chinese medicine, didn't think about acupuncture, didn't give a shit about this at all. But I can remember like being at my folks' house for some reason, and they were out of town, and I was going through this separation, and we had done it in a way that a lot of like people do, and people maybe in the age range do. We dragged it out as long as possible to be as painful as it possibly could be. So we did that. It happens. But I can remember like staring in front of the mirror, 20 something year old me, 24, 25-year-old me, and just feeling all this pain through my chest. And what later on I would learn are acupuncture points that are related to the pericardium and the heart.
mm.
And just being like, ugh, ugh, and like trying to dig my nails in. And I literally had the thought, like, because I grew up in the same house with my grandma, I thought I should just take one of her knitting needles and just like, I didn't want to hurt myself. I wanted to just open this up. So I wasn't trying to like stake myself or something. But
No.
I was like thinking I would just jab this knitting needle into these points and try to break this open. And it makes me laugh every time because I didn't think of acupuncture even for like a second, even with that. But intuitively, a lot of us have had those experiences where like, oh my God, this really, I can feel the physical aspect of like, we all know we call it heartbreak, right?
Mm,
So, anyways, I thought that was an important thing to bring up too. And I don't know what that means in terms of our whole cultural relationship model, but there's something in that that I think is important to like talk about. And you know, this is such a weird set of subjects because there's so many ways that people want to handle their personal lives and relationships. We all think about this in different ways. For me, I think really influenced by my spiritual beliefs, Tantra and Rumi, and the things that I think are important. We've had episodes about this before. I'm really interested in what Esther Perel calls the uniqueness model of interacting with people, where the main thing is to really find the people that you deeply emotionally connect with. Those always don't have to be like physically intimate relationships, but you want those connections. In a certain sense, it's finding the people that you feel karmically close with, you might say, karmically entwined with, and you foster those relationships. And my critique, and I know Esther Perel's kind of an interesting person. She's one of our relationship experts we reference, right?
mm, mm-hmm.
Here and there, you know, that, that's sort of the philosophy I've tried to take out into my life. And at the same time, I realized that like this isn't the dominant paradigm of our culture. Our culture is much more what Esther Perel calls a uniqueness or an exclusivist culture.
Exclusive, yeah.
Yeah, exclusivist, where your main thing is just to like all your eggs are in the basket of this one person, and you can't spread your connections around. And again, not even just physically or sexually or something, even emotionally, that's a little bit taboo in the culture. And again, I've wrestled a lot with what I think about what that means. I feel like in some ways I'm in the similar headspace to like an Esther Perel, um, where like there's some kind of problem I see within that. Now we'll all address this problem and try to see what we think it means in our own way. But I could say that this has been we all have our own, as they say, like Zen koans in our life. Our Zen riddles are things that life presents us as things that we wonder about.
Yeah,
And
very
this is
common statement, Eric. Everyone says that.
yeah. Well, Hosokawa Roshi. I really
Yes.
held back from snapping back at that, Daniel. I took a deep breath. I was inclined to snap back, but see, this is love of the heart for each
Right.
other. Okay, so the thing is, a Zen riddle is one of these like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? They have these Zen riddles, right? And my Zen teacher in my 20s, Hosokawa Roshi, said, "Yeah, I can give you a riddle from the Zen tradition that's sort of your own a spiritual puzzle to meditate on, right? Use it as a tool." And I was going to explain this, Daniel. I just didn't get a chance. But in any case, he says the ones that are come up from your own life are the most powerful ones.
Mm,
So my point is, I think this has been a big thing for me to have to think about because this question of uniqueness is so to the core of what I think is important in life. And I'm, kind of uniqueness person in a non-uniqueness culture. So I'm looking at it kind of from my own perspective, and we'll all have our own perspectives on this. But I mean, the thing that like I wonder about, and again, we think about these things each in our own ways, even between the two of us, Daniel. But a lot of these relationships, the problem is they're going to blow up a lot of them,
hmm
right? And then they're going to blow up a lot of times in ways that are really ugly
hmm
or really damaging. And when you start thinking about that relative to the heart, you get a lot of people who are going to have these things of like, oh man, I need like self-protection. And then, kind of like the imagery, the pericardium rushes in like the ministers to like protect the empress, right? Everything rushes to the center in this way, in this protective way. And I don't know what to think about that, but I wanted to bring the subject matter up because I think a lot of people might be walking around stuck in these sort of like semi-heartbroken things, It can be like the acute version of that, you'd say medically, like your friend from back in the day with the pericarditis or something.
mm.
But the whole idea is that this pericardium could kind of close and kind of do this self-protective thing, and it gets kind of stuck, right? And then it's hard to let those kind of expressive heart type energies come back out again. It's a real problem. So I let me throw it back to you. What do you think about all that
Yeah,
stuff?
no, of course. Well, I mean, we've, worked on this together in clinic, right,
Yeah.
when I was in school. And it's definitely it's out there for sure. Sometimes it's more palpable than other to some people than to others. And I could say that like, I want people to understand we're not specifically talking about relationship as in like romantic relationship. That this could happen amongst friends, this can happen amongst family, this could happen even without anybody else being involved. You can have your heart broken over not getting into a particular college you want to get into, or, it doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. Ideas that you had that are different now, or even some situations in life, a loss of a loved one or a, friend or something like this, loss of an identity, loss of your country for some people. All of these things can totally cause some aspect of yourself to rush in and protect some other part of yourself. And if there is not space for grief, right? This is where the grief comes in. This is the mental element like we talked about a few weeks ago. If there is not a space for grief, then you don't let it go. You actually don't grieve it, you don't move on, and that pericardium stays protected around the heart. You stay shielded. And as time goes on, that shielding becomes harder and thicker and much more difficult to work through because it starts to affect your mind, right? So, and Eric, you could pop in anytime you feel like, but the mind and the heart are very similar characters, same word in Chinese, Shin, Xin, and they're describing the same thing. So they're describing mind and heart as the same. And so as this pericardium protects the heart, right, protects the most sensitive feeling part about our being, because the heart is all about feeling. That is where the mind lies. And many times people say, oh, mind, body, spirit, right? Oh, we have a mind, body, spirit approach. Well, they say brain, mind as in brain, body as in body, and or heart as in body, and then spirit as the, sort of I don't know, you want to say esoteric view of something that cannot be named. But in this case, they're talking about Shin in the heart. Same as Shen is the mind. So when something affects the heart, it affects your mind. So as years of unprocessed grief go unprocessed, you begin to change your perspective and make decisions based on a overprotected and overguarded heart that are made from fear, the water element that we talked about a week ago or so. And so now you have this kind of like weird cycle that you have essentially like, pieces of a broken heart held together by a very toughened exterior that you really need to grieve, actually. And doesn't necessarily have to be like this big grandiose thing, but they need to be acknowledged, or at least you need the space to acknowledge them so that you can live in a space of connectivity, of sharing your light, if you will, and not being moved back into the water element or allowing the water element to control the fire, where you're deciding and living in a more fear-based place. So this is kind of like, we see this really all the time. At least I feel like I do.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I'll say I got so many things within this range of conversation I find so fascinating about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, like, I don't know what it means. If you look at human beings, right, and how human beings bond from the heart, right? I don't disagree that you have to be able to grieve things out, but I also don't know what it means if you have like a whole way of life where there's these constant choppings and these bonds are constantly being broken. I don't know what that means in terms of even like saying, I'll just keep grieving these things out and grieving these things out and grieving things out. I don't know the answer to this, but I really wonder about it very deeply because I think there is something in the culture of like bonds get broken really easy in this culture. People chop,
Yeah.
people cut and they cut seriously,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know what it means in terms of the heart mind connection, that part and heart, mind, and Shen or spirit things with people. I think it's a culture that, on some level, there can be real deep bonds between people that I think, are mutually agreed are deep, but people will still cut,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever the reasons that they have. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what that means if you keep doing that over and over and over again, what that means in terms of what that does to the heart and the Shen. And I guess if you even get like in terms of like human history or something, you would really, and again, I think from a uniqueness paradigm, I'm putting on my uniqueness hat with this. But there's like kind of two sides to the question. One would be like, we have a culture that's very much built on the idea of like, I'll be with somebody or I'll be with a group of people for a certain amount of time. And if I cut, I cut, right? And I think some of that, I wonder to myself whether that's a bit naive to think that you can keep cutting these things without having an impact on the heart and the Shen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that I wonder about, because you have things where there's real deep interconnectivity and almost like alchemy between people in the roomy sense, and those relationships get lost, and I don't know about that, you know. And so, that I question, that kind of thing of like the constant cutting, or, the Esther Perel thing would be the opposite of that, kind of the mating and captivity idea when she talks about romantic relationships where people are with the same person over and over again, but there isn't room to have connections with other people involved, and then people go kind of flat, right, from that point of view. So I wonder about those things from the point of view of like, you're operating within like a structure or a system now, right? These are sort of the rules of the society in which we live. These are the rules in which you function. It's a system, right? And then you have to look at like, okay, so what are the ups and downs of this system, right? And that does connect you a little bit back to the emotional plague idea, because when you talk about emotional plague, you're talking about social systems. So I don't know. It's a tough set of subject matters. I wonder about a lot. I can see, again, if I'm looking at from like my own kind of, again, I like that uniqueness idea. You make these connections with people. I wonder on both sides of that. If they're constantly being cut, you're losing valuable connection with people, and it's kind of heartbreaking. And like, how often can you do that over and over again, right? It's kind of odd for a human being to do that again and again. That isn't the way people have always lived, right?
But remember what Rumi said.
You break your heart until it opens. But, no one's saying that's ideal.
Right.
There might be better ways of doing that. But I think when I think about him with that, I think he's being realistic. Like you don't know
Sure.
the Rumi story. He has this deep bond with like Shams of Tabriz, right? And they have whatever their profound connection is. And then the way the story goes, it's a not a socially approved relationship. And
No.
there's even aspects of the story where maybe members of Rumi's own family like actually murder the Shams of Tabriz to cut him off from this profound connection. And Rumi is an inspiring person in the sense that he grows from that, right? He becomes this very profound being that we're still talking about hundreds of years later, right? 500, 600 years later, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But it's not the easiest way to roll up, you
No.
know? No. Or like you run the risk of things going potentially flat. That's sort of the more like longer term relationships and how do you keep that vibrant or something like that.
Hmm.
Anyways, I wanted to bring these things up because they're systems questions, right? These are the systems that, we've evolved to function. But anyways, I think they're things worth thinking about,
Hmm.
especially when you start thinking about like heartache, right?
Hmm.
Heartbreak. I mean, I think we all know people like, okay, here's a 6 year relationship, here's a 7 year relationship, here's a three, and they keep getting cut over and over again. So that's one set of problems. And then the other side being, okay, maybe I'm with the same person for 30, 40 years, but how do I keep my heart fire from going kind of flat? So, anyways, I think that relates back to the heart in kind of a profound way. So I
Hmm.
wanted to throw it out there.
Hmm.
Um, Anything about that more before we go on to maybe other factors real quick?
No, we'll go forward.
Okay. So, the things that popped into mind to me, and these are all pretty tough subject matters. In Chinese medicine, sometimes they talk about internal causes, the emotion, the Taoist idea of that, the emotions and how they impact the body and the mind,
Hmm.
and that interconnectivity between the two. They'll talk about external causes like infectious disease. And if we look at our thing now, we've been constantly speculating on what's going on in the now. And some of this would be like sort of the COVID thing that swept
Hmm.
through,
Hmm.
and how many people had maybe weird kind of damage to the heart that happened, because we all got so exposed to this bizarre thing that did so much potential damage to the heart. And we brought it up before. I think like I can remember 2020 seeing some of the people who really struggled with COVID. They were sick for weeks and weeks at a time. And they had a lot of heart symptoms afterwards. And that
Yeah.
was like not an uncommon thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
So with
heart and lungs, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. But like they'd go to like do their normal workout and all of a sudden they're having like tachycardia and palpitations. Like, what happened to me? That was definitely like 2020 vibe. So I've been trying to bring that up with the different systems we've been talking about as we've been going through. And that seemed like that happened to people too. And there are a lot of cases like that. And then the controversial vaccine question too, which we don't want to fucking deal with that past a certain point. But whatever it is that around this whole set of experiences could have been damaging to the hearts of people. The idea is in the emotional plague and Reich's concept, what damages the body damages the mind, what damages the mind damages the body. So you can flip that script in two directions. And so, anyways, it's worthwhile thinking about because a lot of this stuff is happening in the aftermath of these, major historical events that we're living through. And it came up some episodes ago. I don't know whether I think you brought it up as a thing, or I don't even know how it played itself, but like we don't talk about COVID anymore,
Nope.
right? It's all, well, that happened. That, but all of the stuff that induced that sent like a shockwave
Yes.
through the culture, like in the Chinese medical world, sometimes we talk about heart shock, a traumatic event. That
Trauma.
was a trauma,
That's a trauma. I
and
mean, if you
people
talk
who were
about it with,
lost and the fear that it induced and how the whole thing got so chaotic. I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
you know, talk about it with somebody now, and you're going to get a potent response, one way or the other. Generally more conservative people are going to fall on the lines of like, they, the vaccines, blah, 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 And on
Yeah.
the other side is going to be like the lockdowns, the people with idiots, and, all the death. So, like, regardless of what irritates you about it, we can totally meet in the center and say like, well, this was a traumatic event for sure. One that was not grieved at all, just brushed under the rug and blamed on somebody else and move about your day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 However you want to like process those things through. And it was
Hmm.
I can't remember when we did that episode. I don't know if that was like
We do episodes every year on in the second week of March, occupying 1 hour of our time to
did
say,
we do it
hey,
this March again? Did we do it? I can't
we've done it
remember.
every year.
Oh, good for us. We keep bringing it back.
I'm not letting it go. I mean, it was a massive turn. That's probably the biggest event, that and 9/11.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, what else there would have, what else in this lifetime, what else in this last 30 years,
I
you
mean,
know?
like 2008 was a big deal, but
But
yeah,
that was a big deal as it was there wasn't a day, there was I mean the market crashed on a day, but that home prices were affected for like 4 years after that. That's a long period, you know.
yeah,
The burst of 99. But again, if you're not in the market, you're feeling it, but not like totally.
yeah,
This affected 9/11 affected everybody.
yeah. And then you get to like
Everybody.
COVID, it was like it rippled through the entire world. I
The
mean, it
entire
was in
right.
the United States for 9/11 and it rippled out, but this was like, hey, this is going everywhere.
Yeah.
And I guess that's like your example of like whether you think of it as like sadness and grief or just the whole thing of like processing something through, just what that means to process something through.
Mm-hmm.
This would probably be called like psychologically, psychospiritually, like unprocessed material, right? This thing hasn't been
Absolutely.
processed.
No.
It's sitting there just at the heart of things, at the
Oh,
core of things, right? Just there. And I don't even know what it would mean like to have that process through even. I don't know what you would even do because you have to come to some kind of it's not even an individual question at this point. It's kind of like what's the social reality around that? And we
right.
have no
Yeah.
fucking social reality. We
Right.
can't come to some shared understanding of anything.
What's the acceptance?
Yeah, it's all fractured.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
yeah,
that's
there's people who wear masks still that are not necessarily immune compromised. They just feel better wearing a mask.
yeah,
I'm not going to say don't do it. If that's what you feel is better for you to do, then it's a free country. You go for it. You're not hurting anybody. Wear it. No problem. You know? And people who are upset about vaccines and people who are upset about, I mean, there's heartache amongst all of the sides, you
yeah.
know? Everybody can agree that they are not happy.
And then like again using that little word like unprocessed or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? No one has
Mm-hmm.
any consensus of like what any of that meant, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means within the society and culture when you do emotional plague. If you can't come to some shit, it's like getting through Vietnam or something, and eventually say, you know what, this is how we think about this retrospectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you could say the Iraq and Afghanistan
I
wars,
was
and
just
that was
gonna,
so
yeah.
close. It's like that. You have to come to some consensus reality, if you want to make a culture like a person, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm. Okay, so I think, yeah, it's worthwhile that we talk about that when that
Yeah.
pops up, and we've been trying to do it in these episodes. I got one last thing. We don't have a lot of time left, but I think I'd
Yeah.
be remiss if I just didn't bring it up. We have like a podcast called Gin and Tantra. Some of that's going to have to do with sexuality, and I think we're in that situation of having to address questions of like sexual violence, sexual abuse, at least bring that up, right,
Yeah.
whenever that's appropriate
Yeah.
too. One of the things when you talk about the heart, um, is that the heart and the emotions connect into your human sexuality too, right? And if you're a victim of sexual violence of some type or another, sorry, my voice is getting a little tired at the end of this long day. I've been talking a lot. But when you get to those kinds of things, it tends to kind of like cut that connection
Yeah.
between like the heart center, you might say, and that's those parts that connect into sexuality in positive ways. It puts a cut,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, sexual violence, sexual assault, and the different ranges of what this goes through. So I think that had to be mentioned in a Jin and Tantra context because that's something obviously that's so important. And it kind of like, from Reich's point of view, it kind of like creates a cut too. He talks about that. It isolates sort of this more spirit, mind, as you were saying, Shin center, the emotional open-heartedness center that gets cut off from sexuality. And obviously part of like the tantric world is trying to heal that
Mm.
problem. A conversation with a student, with a couple of people on campus in different ways about this, and I don't want to even say what they said verbatim, but this whole issue of like we're in the midst of like the Epstein thing dragging on and on and on, right? With still no resolution to that. And still with that undercurrent of feeling like, a lot of people will feel who can empathize with the kinds of people who went through those kinds of situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women who've been victims of sexual violence or children who's been victims of sexual violence and still it won't get definitively resolved. And we can't get the consensus reality again of what that means so that you can start to feel like, okay, there's a healing that can happen within that. It's unprocessed still, using the
Hmm.
language you were using, right? It's not processed. And if you happen to be an individual who's been through those kinds of experiences, then you're like, okay, we still can acknowledge on a collective level the foulness of this, the horrificness of this, and like process this through. No, it just sits there, right? And as far as emotional plague stuff goes, well, that's sitting there like a tumor or something. That's like
Yeah.
cancerous, right? It's
Yeah.
just sitting there like a fucking cancer.
Yeah.
And eventually you have to like excise it out, to heal it up. So, anyways, I thought that was important to say something about, right, for our
Agreed. Yeah.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I had in the docket. Anything else you had, Daniel?
No, I think that's it. I think one of the things to mention, maybe in closing here is that like when you have good heart fire and you're passionate about something, that has a like fire, like the element of fire, it wants to spread. It wants to connect. It wants people to see it. Like a lotus flower, like any kind of flower, like a rose or something like because roses are often, associated with love and love from the heart, right?
Yeah. The
That
red
like
flowers. Yeah.
yeah, like it wants to be seen. It wants to be shared. Fire wants to spread. In the negative way, in a forest fire, people's passions want to be felt. Why? Because people want to feel other people's passions in general. Look at speakers throughout the history. You know, good, strong orators. I'm not going to name some of them because there's no need to give those people names any more airtime than they already have. But people who speak passionately, even if it's vile shit, you can see the passion in their speech. Again, even ignorance has passion. Passion is just passion. It's not. It doesn't necessarily always mean it's not always compassionate. It's just passionate. But people like to feel that. And so I feel like when someone's heart is well balanced and they have a good enough heart fire, the desire to be around other people, the desire to share, the desire to create is a natural, outpouring of this kind of inner joy. And we talk about a lot of the kind of pathological signs of these elements when they're dysregulated. I want to just point out ones when they are well regulated, and that's kind of the one that I find to be a question that I ask people in the clinic all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, we talk personal on this little podcast. For me, I'm a big believer in like this path of like the tantras, or this path of like a Rumi, or this kind of thing. One of my favorite quotes within this that made me think this was right for me was, and it's in the context of the Buddhist tantras, like tantras for passionate people,
Mm,
right? It's a way that you express your passion and use it in a way that's spiritually constructive for yourself and then the others, right? That you can connect with in this way. So I'm a really big believer in that, this idea of allowing the heart to be open and then to connect to those people that are of like karmic significance, and we all can help each other blaze more and more. I really believe in that, right? And so, I mean, on a personal level, that's I think why I've gravitated towards those spiritual paths that like have that at the heart, right? Whether it's a kind of a
at the
Rumi
heart.
philosophy, haha, I wasn't even doing that on purpose. It just naturally flunks out, or the tantras, or some of these things that have that passionate quality. And Reich, this is love, creativity, joy, pleasure, right? I think those are very powerful things. And then, the more that these energies can be cultivated, then the whole principle is the more you're able to feel sort of the spiritual bliss of things. And that sort of is the fuel of spiritual growth overall. So that's the pitch of the show on some level or
There
another,
you there
right?
you have it.
Good closer. All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as always, Eric, gracias a mucho.
Thank you so much.
Y los todos, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate everybody. If you made it to the end of the video, good for you. Your attention span is like that of a refined wine. Although I don't think that has pays too much attention, but you know what I'm saying. Like, comment, subscribe, share our work. Hit us up, jinandtantra@gmail.com. Send the love, send the thoughts, send the other things too. You can hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast, or of course, leave a comment here. We'll try and get back to you when we can. We definitely love hearing feedback from everybody. We genuinely love to share what brings us passion. This is an example of our heart fire being shared with all of you. So for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.